Eric Mother, Mother.com for the weekend of December 5th and December 6th, 2015. Let's take a look at the markets here, and I'm recording this with the Dow and I guess the US markets with about 15 minutes to close. US markets are having a great session on Friday. So let's keep that in perspective here as we look at the weekend videos. And this is how markets closed in Asia overnight or on Friday. Pretty much a down picture for most markets. European markets were slightly down. So here's a picture on the European market, slightly down, not as much as in Asia. Take a look at the Americas, and we see that the markets are pretty much the biggest mover being the Brazilian market, down about 2%. Canadian market is slightly to the positive. And again, US markets, Friday's action, they are having a nice session, up about 2% across the board, as you can see on the Dow and NASDAQ and S&P 500. Gold is having a good session, up about 2%. We see that crude oil is down about 2.5%. So let's take a look at world charts. We begin by taking a look at Australia, and we can see that I guess the theme you're going to see across most of the charts I'm going to be talking about is the weekly charts. The weekly charts are still giving this market a problem. Some daily charts are okay, but the biggest problem in the market right now is weekly charts, which leads me to think that even if markets have a nice beginning of the week, the weekly charts still have to be corrected. Otherwise, we are still looking at markets that could still be looking to go lower, and that's the I guess the brief analysis of this video. Take a look at the Australian market. If you take the weekly closing highs, you see that there's still this line here that the market has been unable to move above. If we take a look at where the market has been showing resistance on the Australian market, you can see that once we broke through this level here, this break sometime in June, July, once we broke through there, the market has found it difficult moving above the 50 level on the weekly RSI. So we are seeing markets struggling to move well on the weekly charts, and this might suggest that net the week-to-week action still continues to be down, in my opinion. If we take a look at the Australian market, the key to watch here is what happens should it move below the recent monthly closing low. I think that would be a tell as to where the market is going. So just a level to watch there in case the market is gonna eventually turn a little bit more bearish is 5,060.80. Anything below that is not gonna be a good sign of where markets are gonna be trading short term. So just keep that in mind. For now, the market is holding above that low, so maybe things might be good, but I want to stress this. The biggest issue I see in markets across the globe is failure to do well on the weekly charts, and that's where the biggest sell signals can be seen across the board. We take a look at China. Keep in mind that this does not reflect Friday's down session, and what we are seeing over the last couple of weeks, if not the last couple of 6 to 5 months, is that the market has been struggling to hold above the 50 RSI level, and the more you continue to show resistance on the 50 RSI level, it tends to suggest that you've entered a different phase of the market, which is a market that wants to go down. So clearly, if the Chinese market is to do well, it needs to first and foremost clear that resistance, and it needs to be moving its weekly RSI above the 50 level. Otherwise, resistance around the 50 would suggest net to expect lower prices. If you take a look at the Japanese market, we also see similar type analysis, and we talked about this over the last couple of weeks. Ever since breaking below this level here, so this break in August, the market has struggled to capture those highs over there, and so we can see that if we draw a line somewhere around there, that this is where the market is struggling to move above on the weekly RSI. Keep in mind that this number here where the market is struggling to move above so happens to be at about 61.8 on the weekly, and until such a time the market can clear that red line, the thinking here is that the weekly charts are still suggesting a market that still wants to go down. If we take a look at the Indian market by way of the Nifty, we can see that we've been talking about the fact that the market was trading and has been trading below September's monthly closing low, that this market is in trouble. The level to watch there is 7948. 30.90. This is a fresh break, and also keep in mind that if we break below the 50 RSI level on the monthly, that might suggest an even deeper correction. So as long as the market is holding below 7948, this market has the risk of seeing lower prices. If we take a look at the longer term monthly chart going back about 13 years, I just want to show you that right now what was support over the last couple of months has been broken as of right now. So the Indian market, given the fact that the RSI lows going back to 08, 09, this line here connecting the lows since 09 and even here has, as of right now, is being broken. So the risk is that this is a market that could actually continue to break as long as this line has been violated. We take a look at the 2-year weekly for the Indian market, and because the 10-week moving average is already trading at fresh lows, so the 10-week moving average is already trading at fresh lows, that indicates that more than likely the price is also going to have to make fresh 52-week lows, and that's the risk. Now let me show you the South African market, and the reason being that this was the first market to crack. So as markets made highs earlier on in 2015, this was the first market that I noticed was cracking, and that was sometime here after the highs it made in April. And this crack led to other markets also showing a bearish move over the last couple of months. The reason why I bring this up is because right now, if I take a look at a 3-year monthly chart for the South African market, it is breaking down again. And I think this might also be probably setting the stage for other markets to do the same. So we are seeing the South African market move to fresh lows on the price based on the previous weekly closing low or monthly closing low. We see that the RSI has moved to fresh 3-year lows, which is a major sell signal. And more importantly, we see that the RSI on the monthly is moving below 50. As you move below 50, you tend to have to introduce a large number, which is why the market is already down about 6%, and we just began the new month. So there might be more downside, and the MACDs don't look that strong. You can see the MACDs are moving to fresh lows. The MACD is trading below 0 here, and then the main MACD right now is also just about to move to fresh 3-year lows. So I think the South African market is showing signs of leading the world markets lower, is what I'm getting at. We can see from the weekly that it broke down to fresh recent lows on the weekly time frame. So this market is one we have to watch and see whether it is predicting lower prices worldwide. Previously, a couple of months ago, it did lead markets lower. If we take a look at the ETF that trades in the US, the NGE, to track the Nigerian market, we continue to see that the Nigerian market, this ETF, continues to trade below 30.90, suggesting that the Nigerian market continues to also struggle. If we take a look at the FTSE, we can also see that just like the Australian market, that's what I'm trying to say, it has been struggling to hold the 50 RSI level. And if you use that type of understanding that when markets show resistance at the 50 level, that tends to be markets that want to explore lower prices. You can see resistance here around the 50 weekly RSI level, gave you those highs, and over the last couple of months we've been coming and hitting that level here, which is the 50 RSI level. Market's been pulling back. So we can see from this chart there's a lot of resistance. As you can see also, you can take a line connecting the highs on the weekly chart going back to highs of this year, and you can see that this is also where the market is finding it difficult to hold above that line. So weekly charts continue to be showing a lot of resistance in markets across the globe. Take a look at the FTSE, also came back to the break point on the daily, and the pullback on Friday still shows that it did find resistance on this level here. So the daily has a lot of resistance also. I think it might make sense if we find some early movement at the beginning of the week, because if we take a look at the daily chart for the US markets, this line held. So the RSI support line held for US markets as of Friday's action. So it makes sense that this also shows support as we begin the new week, which is going to be the first full trading week of December 2015. If we take a look at the monthly chart, I think the risk is that as long as the market is down for the month, the risk is that this could eventually lead to the RSI making a fresh 3-year low. So unless the market is positive for the month, the risk, in my opinion, continues to be to the downside because of this monthly chart. This monthly chart doesn't look good, and you can also see resistance on the monthly chart. If you take the highs, intraday highs or intra-month highs, seems to draw a line where this is showing resistance. So the weeklies and the monthlies don't look too hot as of right now. If we take a look at the French market, actually let's take a look, and we can see that it too is showing weekly resistance. If you take the break point in the RSI, so this break point took place somewhere here, which corresponds with the market coming off the highs here, and so we can draw a line from there, which should be something like that. And what we see here is that this is also showing signs of struggling. Every time it comes back to this level, it's smacked back down, and also we can see another line connecting RSI highs. So we formed a double top recently on this declining RSI line, and that's why I keep saying that on the weekly charts there's a lot of work that the markets need to do if they are going to move higher. I think the weekly chart suggests that week to week the market might still be looking to point and head to the downside. Similar type analysis can also be seen by the German market. We broke through, let's call it somewhere around there in May. RSI broke down there. Market hasn't been back to those levels. If we draw a line from here, you can see that as of the highs of the last 2 weeks, the market hit that level and has been pulling back since. So until we can clear that red line, this market continues to be suspect in my opinion. If we take a look at the Canadian market, I'll draw 2 lines. One showing the price resistance on the weekly, and as of this week we came back and hit that level right there and we pull back. Alright, so that's resistance on the price. If you take a look at the RSI, a simple line connecting the highs on the RSI on the weekly, 2-year weekly chart, and you can see as of right now we have been unable to move above this line. So until such a time as we can move above that line, one has to continue assuming that this market more than likely will find it easier to go lower. Otherwise, for it to move higher, it needs to clear the RSI resistance and also the price resistance. Since we haven't seen that take place, we have to assume that as of right now, the analysis suggests that net the market is poised to go lower. If we take a look at the Canadian market, I think the biggest risk is if it breaks below to recent monthly closing lows. So watch that. Any move below the recent monthly closing low, and the level to watch there is 13,306.96. Anything below that would suggest a market that is in trouble. That would correspond with the RSI and the MACDs moving to fresh lows. So you can see that the RSI would be moving to fresh lows. The MACD would move to fresh lows, excuse me. The MACD would also be moving below zero. The other MACD is already below zero and already trading at fresh lows. So this market is not looking great, but it needs to hold above the 13,306. Also, RSI would move to fresh 3-year lows, and the key here is if the RSI moves below 38.2, expect the market to drop very fast. So I think the risk here is that if it drops below 38.2 on the monthly RSI, given the fact that the MACDs are breaking down, this would suggest to me that you're going to see a very big move lower. It's going to seem like a crash if it moves below 38.2. So the Canadian market needs to repair itself, because at this rate, any movement below 38.2 and we are going to see a huge drop. If we take a look at the Brazilian market, just like the other world markets, on the weekly RSI, you can see that this is still showing resistance on this trend line on the weekly. Also, we have the break and the RSI recently. So this break somewhere around there, once we broke through here in July, the market has not been back to that level. If we draw a line connecting that break point, which is what I call the uniformity line, we can see that market has been struggling to move above the 50 level and also above the red line. Net, that suggests that this market is in trouble until it can clear these resistance levels on the price here or on the RSI resistance level. Take a look at the monthly, and what we have here is, as long as the market is finding support above, or at least trading above the recent monthly closing low, the level to watch there is 45059.34. If it can hold above that, that's okay, the market is stabilizing. But if it cracks below the recent monthly closing low, be aware, because the RSI and the MACDs don't look great. You can see that the RSI would be moving to fresh lows, 3-year lows, and the MACDs would also be would be probing fresh lows. So as long as it's holding above 45,000, that's great. If it cracks below 45,059, be aware there might be lower prices. So one more chart to conclude this video, S&P 500, and this is a close, and you can see the S&P 500 at the end of the week was almost unchanged, and I believe the reason being that it is coming back to test this resistance level, just like we've seen in other markets. It is also still showing resistance on the top side on the weekly price. So the S&P 500, after a nice close on Friday, still showing the same resistance as from the week before, showing resistance in the RSI from the week before, and also the line connecting the previous RSI highs. So S&P 500, even given the nice gain on Friday, is still showing weekly resistance. If the market is to do well, it needs to clear the price resistance on the weekly and the two lines I draw here on the weekly RSI. So given all this, it still suggests to me that we should not be surprised if the market still goes on to struggle, given where it closed at the end of the first trading week of 2015. Eric Mwadid.com. Enjoy your weekend. Good luck. Peace and blessings. EACS.